in this episode of the Living God's Light podcast.
There was this absolute connection and this oneness and this divinity where I was experiencing everyone in their magnificence. I mean, in simple words, I was seeing them as God sees us. And I'm thinking, I failed as a father. I failed the test of life. And I had this thought as the presence came right behind me. And my thought was, I hope I can be forgiven. I was held by God. I was held by the universe. I was held in my grief. I was held in my pain, and I was allowed to make a choice and exercise my will. And it was profound. It was very profound.
I am
living God's light.
Wow. I was introduced to Vinney by a friend of mine, Alan Smith, and we had breakfast in Salt Lake City. It was at the National IONS Conference. And, Alan had said, "Oh, you're going to love this guy." And I said, "Yeah, I'm sure I will." But yeah, we sat, we talked, I heard Vinney's story, and I just thought, this is incredible. And then, of course, having had a near-death experience of my own, we connected, and we don't hang out every day, but I just watched Vinney as he stepped into it, as he shared his experience, because I was very reluctant to share mine. It took me a decade to even talk about it. Mm-hmm. I enjoyed watching him share so authentically and touch so many people. And I just thought, wow, I'm so glad I got to know him and got introduced to him. And yeah, anything I can do to support Vinney, I'm all in.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
We love you, Jeff. We appreciate that.
I love you too. And we connected in Phoenix, and Vinney said, "I've never been the keynote at this conference before." I said, "Oh man, you just be you. You don't have to worry about a thing. You just show up as you, and you've nailed it." And he did. He really did.
He did nail it. Yeah, I agree with that. So cool. At the IONS conference, Jeff, I kept hearing you were around, but I never got to see you or meet you. So it really is a pleasure to meet you today.
Yeah, I was here, there, and everywhere. Mostly I was hanging out in that little, I don't know, the lounge, the cafe, the bar, whatever it was. There was a little booth around the corner.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I was seeing you there at breakfast in the morning.
Yeah, I kind of hide. I tend to hide when I go to those things. Not that I'm antisocial. I'm just incredibly shy. I mean, I'm actually an introvert, believe it or not, but
I can relate to that. Well, you're also, being an introvert, you're a bit of a celebrity at those things now, because was it 2 years ago that you keynoted? I know you had many speaking parts. You did the
Salt Lake City,
opening.
you keynoted.
There was, and it's funny, I've been involved with IONS now for almost 15 years, and I keynoted about 4 conferences in a row, starting in Arlington, and then it was, was it Miami? Or anyway, it was about 4 in a row. And I kept saying, people are going to get sick of me, But hold on, Vinney, because you'll be about 4 in a row.
Well, your experience is fascinating and unique, and the way that you present it is just so authentic and so genuine. It's so easy to connect with, and then who you are radiates through that, and you've just got this magnetic energy that just draws people in. So I can understand why you got asked to keynote 4 times, and then having seen you in action with your kind of your spiritual connection, and then the broader view that your experience has kind of added to your life, is fascinating. That's and inspiring so at the same time.
So kind. I'm blushing a little bit. It's funny on camera when I blush, but thank you. That's so kind. Thank you.
I loved honoring the ceremony that you did too. That was really neat in Salt Lake.
Yeah, we had a little ceremony, and it's funny, people ask me to do that, and that was underground. I got involved with a well, it was interesting. It was a shaman, it was a woman that was, and shamanism is such a buzzword now. Like, everybody's a shaman and nobody's a shaman, but there's, shaman soap. If I go in the garden, I'm like, what, how did this become a thing? But she was the real deal. And this was before I had ever spoken about my near-death experience. I had not talked about it publicly. I had not written a book, and I had been somewhat intrigued and maybe even infatuated with indigenous cultures. We had a fellow show up on our farm, Ben Quintus, and he was a horse whisperer, but he was also Cherokee, and he did it in a way different way. My dad would tie the animal up and think he could control a 1,200-pound horse and teach it who was boss and get a saddle on it. But Ben went in and energetically began connecting with the horses and creating trust. And he had 3 young, ponies ready to ride in 3 days. And my dad was just blown away. But I watched his mode and his method, but I also felt, that was the thing, I felt this different energy from him and the way he did it. I mean, gosh, he went out in the middle of the corral and started singing to them, and I'd never seen anything like it, and then he took off his shirt and laid down on the ground, and the horses were walking and sniffing him, and he's reaching up and, touching their legs and bellies and their faces. And he just literally connected trust. And he said things to me like, you'll never conquer the horse, but you can be one with it. And I'm 12, so this was a very first introduction before any of this. And then later in life, after the near-death experiences, I'm just processing, attempting to make sense of it all. I ended up going to a conference up in Lava Hot Springs, of all places, and it was a small gathering of shamans, indigenous spiritual people. And at the end of the first day, I'd paid my fee. I was at the conference. I was learning, and they were teaching the Muniki, which is an ancient process. And the head shaman came up to me after the first day, and she said, "You've been there." And I'm like, "I've been where? I've been in your conference all day." She said, No. You've gone to the world of spirits and come back." And I said, "Well, how do you know this?" I mean, I hadn't spoken about it. And she's like, "Oh, I see you. I see it. I know it. And you experience this, and you experience this, and you experience this." And she kind of explained that once someone passes through that veil and then comes back, that we've crossed the rainbow bridge. We've taken the great journey. And she said, "I want to work with you." And I worked with her for 7 months, 7 moon cycles, actually. It's all based on moon cycles and the cycles of the earth. But I received shamanic rites, and I received, ceremonies and practices. And this was free of any plant medicine or anything like that. This was just going deep within. And suddenly it began to kind of make sense of my near-death experience and what I had experienced. And it became a spiritual practice. But I didn't talk about it. I didn't publicize that. But then about 2012, she said, "Jeff, it's time. It's time for you to start teaching this and reaching out to your circle and your influence and your people." And so I did. And anyway, that's a very long story about why we have these little opening of sacred space ceremonies at some of these conferences, and people have found out. And it's ancient wisdom. It's stuff that's been done. And I mix Muniki with Lakota, with all different cultures, and even some of my own spin on it. But it's a beautiful process, beautiful little rituals and things that just really work to keep me connected as much as possible.
Well, I love the similarities and the synchronicities across time and across cultures that really touches the core of what it means to be human and have that spiritual connection. That I'm sure you found similarities and connections also in Eastern and African and just all around the world, because we're all children of God, and God wants to touch each and every one of us, and we're all here to have this experience as humans. And there are these knowings, this wisdom that helps us on our journey.
I love that. And there's like this golden cord of truth that runs through everything. And all cultures, and this is what I found. I mean, my near-death experience kind of opened me up to, like, wow, okay, I have experienced true unconditional love from a divine source, from God. And how do I mean, it was confusing. It's like, well, where is it here? Where is it in this third dimension? How do I experience that here and now? But I began looking into so many things. I mean, I studied my own religion. I studied other religions. I studied other modes of spirituality. And you're right. I mean, it's funny that the Munich, they say, is ancient, that it came across the Bering Strait. It maybe feels more Eastern than Western in many ways. But there's these commonalities, and we have so much more in common as manifestations of the divine, as God's than we'll ever have separate. We get so hung up in these, well, I believe this and you believe that, or I look like this and you look like that, or I have this preference and you have that preference, or whatever. We forget that we have far more in common. We're really far more alike at a soul level than we are different. And yet in that oneness, we're all so unique. And that's what's so beautiful. I mean, how boring if we were all alike, I mean, and yet the Creator knows, like, everyone gets to be their own unique vibration in this universe, this one verse, this one song. And yet we all resonate at our own vibration, at our own tone. And when that harmonizes in love and connection and unity, that's heaven to me. That's what we're here to experience and maybe even figure out. But I love that. Yeah, I love it.
So, Jeff, are you okay? Can you share about your experience, your near-death experience, like what happened and what it was, basically what it was like, what you learned?
Yeah, I'm happy to share that. And it's really interesting. I'm coming up on this next Monday will be 28 years since the accident. So it's been almost 3 decades. And I share that because I can talk about it now. I mean, I used to just cry. I couldn't even speak of it. But my near-death experience was the result of an automobile accident. And the whole family was in the car. We were taking a family vacation. It was Easter, it was the Easter weekend. And we went down to southern Utah to see my wife's parents. And we had a beautiful visit down there. And Monday morning came and we said our goodbyes. And I put the kids in their car seats and loaded up the bags, and we hugged everybody, and we got in the car to drive away. And it's interesting that morning because there's things I'll always remember that are kind of, in hindsight, engraven within me. But we were pulling away from the curb, and Tamara, my wife, said, "Wait, stop." I thought she must have forgotten her handbag or something, but she simply said, "I want to go say goodbye to Mom and Dad one more time." And I'll admit, in that moment, I was like, "Oh, come on. We've said goodbye. We got to get on the road." But I stopped the car and I watched as she ran up, and her mom and dad were on the porch waving like Grandma and Grandpa do. But I watched as she hugged them and kissed them both, which was not uncommon. I mean, that wasn't, but I noticed it and I saw it, and she hugged him and she kissed him, and then she ran and jumped in the car. And I bring that up because she must have gotten a whisper. There must have been an intuition, an inspiration, there was this spiritual nod and nudge to go say goodbye to Mom and Dad one more time. And as the day played out, that was the last goodbye. We got on the road. I cranked up the cruise control to 75 miles an hour, and I was on my way home, and we had a 5-hour trip ahead of us. And gosh, it was probably, a couple hours into that trip. And there was reports of crosswinds, and there was reports of a pickup truck that was driving erratically on the interstate. One of the most difficult parts about telling this story is I believe I dozed off. I think I just nodded, just briefly. But whatever happened, I swerved to the right, I overcorrected to the left, and I lost control of the car. And the car began to roll, not off the road, but down the road, down the concrete at 75 miles per hour. And it was a horrific automobile accident. Accident reports said it rolled no less than 6 or 8 times. And I blacked out for the rolling, for the crash. I realized, oh my gosh, we're crashing, but I kind of blacked out. But when the car came to a stop, I was completely conscious. And the first thing I heard was my 7-year-old in the seat behind me crying hysterically. And I thought, I've got to get to my boy. I've got to get to my son. And that's when I realized that I couldn't move. I was pinned, and I couldn't tell the floorboard, the seat, there was all the broken glass. And I wasn't aware of my injuries. I mean, I knew I was struggling to breathe. I knew I was in pain, and I was fighting consciousness. I was losing consciousness, but I was not aware that both of my legs had been crushed. My left leg was eventually amputated above the knee. It was mangled so bad. My back had been damaged. My rib cage had been damaged. My lungs were collapsing. My right arm was almost completely torn out. And then the seatbelt had cut through me and ruptured all my insides. So I was physically a mess. I was unaware of that. I just knew my son's crying. I've got to get to my boy. And that's when I became acutely aware that no one else was crying, that my wife, Tamara, and my youngest son, Griffin, were killed instantly in the accident. And I won't go into the details of what I saw or witnessed or experienced, but that was the darkest moment I've been in. And I knew they were gone. And I mean, the panic, the guilt, the regret, I kept thinking, can't I get those 3 seconds back? I mean, I was driving the car. And it was in that darkness, it was in that despair that the near-death experience began, I suppose. I mean, I was an absolute wreck, physically, emotionally, mentally, all of it. And I felt light come. It's like light. I tangibly felt light come and surround my body. And it felt as if I was rising above the accident scene. And I could breathe, like physically, I felt, it's like, wow, the pain's gone. I can breathe. What's going on? How can I possibly be okay? And I'm in this bubble of light, if you will. And then suddenly Tamara, my wife, who I knew was deceased at the scene, suddenly there she was with me. She was right with me in the light, and she was very much alive. And she was gorgeous. She was radiant. She didn't have injuries that, she had extensive injuries as well, but there she was, beautiful, very much alive, and yet she was emphatic. She kept saying, Jeff, you got to go back. You can't stay. You can't be here. You've got to go back. And we literally had a conversation. I mean, we talked about the fact that if I stayed with her, Spencer, my oldest son, our oldest son, would be orphaned. And we made a choice. We made a decision that I was coming back. Now, in whatever this cosmic knowledge, we knew he couldn't come back, but I could. And that was the most profound goodbye I'll ever say. I mean, there I was looking at the woman I loved more than life, and yet I knew I had a little boy in the backseat of that car who was going to be okay. And we made the choice that I would come back. And it's so interesting. Like, I didn't have to figure out, how do I come back? I mean, our thoughts are so powerful. It's the intention. It was the choice. I'm going back. And then it was like, woof, like all of a sudden I found myself moving about a very busy level 1 trauma center, a hospital. And I have no concept of time in this bubble of light. I later found out people had arrived at the scene. Gosh, one of the first persons to arrive was a doctor. They were able to do some things that may have gotten air into my lungs. They, Spencer, my 7-year-old, he was banged up. He had broken his wrist and his ribs were all bruised. And yet he physically walked away from the accident, but emotionally he thought the whole family was gone. I had to be extricated from the car, airlifted or life flighted to the nearest level 1 trauma center. I didn't know any of that. All I was conscious of is I had crashed the car. Half the family had passed. I had had this experience and said this profound goodbye, and here I am moving about the hospital and moving about in a way that I was aware of everything. Like there was a 360-degree awareness and connection. I was aware of the doctors, the nurses, the patients, the families of the patients. There was a oneness. There was an absolute oneness. And everyone I saw, it's like I knew them. I saw them. I knew their love, their hate, their joy, their motivations. And there was this connection. And yet I was seeing them in such magnificence. It's like I was seeing their souls and thinking, wow, look at them. No matter what happened in their life, what they did or didn't do, or what had been done to them or what they did, I was seeing them in this absolute magnificence and love without judgment. And it was so connected. It's like they were me. In fact, I had a biblical verse come to me as I'm having this connected experience. And it was the famous verse where Jesus says, "In as much as you've done it unto the least of one of these, you've done it unto me." And I thought that was a nice verse about being nice. And of course the people said, well, when did we do it to you? Well, I was hungry and you fed me. I was naked and you clothed me. And yet in this experience that expanded far beyond it. I thought, wow, we really are one. What Jesus was saying is, I am the man in prison. I am the beggar on the street. I am the stranger that simply wants acceptance and to be taken in. And this is what I was experiencing. I was the nurse, I was the doctor, and I still was myself, but there was this absolute connection and this oneness and this divinity where I was experiencing everyone in their magnificence. I mean, in simple words, I was seeing them as God sees us. I was seeing them so differently until I came upon a body I didn't feel anything from, which I thought was weird. So I stepped closer, and that's when I realized, oh my goodness, that's me. I mean, that wasn't me. I was having this profound connected experience, but there was my body. There was my flesh, and that was interesting too. And Vinney, I think you might relate. Like you're looking, and yet I had taken my body for granted. When I was looking at my body, and there was a narrative. There was like this mentorship going on, and it was like behind me, but I was told your body literally is a temple. Your body literally is the temple. And I realized, wow, yeah, look at this magnificent machine. I didn't have to remind my heart to beat or think about my lungs breathing or teach my eyes how to see. I saw the body as this magnificent gift, this beautiful tabernacle. And yet I knew that my soul was to get back in it. And mine was so broken. There was this reverence for it and this sadness that, wow, my body was really a mess. And again, just the conscious thought, I got to go back in. I got to get back with the body. And then, woof, bam, I mean, just the weight of being back in the body, the guilt, the regret, the grief, the trauma, the physical pain, the panic, all of that returned in an intense way. And I was intubated. They had a big tube, doing the breathing from my lungs, and my legs were obviously immobile. My right arm was immobile. Then they tied down my left hand because I kept grabbing at all the medical equipment. And the hospital was difficult. I mean, I was there for almost 6 months. I had 18 surgeries and all putting me back together. But I had profound out-of-body or near-death experiences even during my hospital stay. I mean, I was in ICU, and I would go to surgical recovery, and then I'd go back to ICU. I kept throwing pulmonary emboli, the blood clots that lodge in your lungs, and I had horrible infections based on the way the seatbelt tore me open. It was really physically intense, but the emotional trauma was the challenge. And just knowing half the family had passed and how to deal with that, even though I'd had this out of body or near death experience. It was difficult. I learned a lot, but it was difficult.
Wow. Thank you so much, Jeff, for sharing. I am truly touched. I've never heard your story before, and I can't even imagine.
Well, and thank you. That's so kind. There's so much more to it. I mean, the grief that I had was so intense. And I went through my hospital stay, and it's probably worth pointing out the two most profound experiences were at the scene of the accident, before morphine was administered and all of that. And then I had an intense experience at the end of my hospital stay. After I was off of the narcotics, I was in the rehabilitation wing. I was just a couple weeks from coming home. And I was finally able to sleep on my side because they had stabilized and were able to close up the abdominal wounds that had been infected and had all kinds of issues. And I had laid so long on my back, I had rubbed all the hair off the back of my head. I was bald on the back of my head. And, my brothers were giving me a bad time about that. And my brothers were amazing. I mean, I learned, wow, I mean, they practically lost their jobs to come and sit with me, to be with me, to look out for me. It was amazing. But I was in the rehabilitation wing. I was going to make it. I was alive and well, and I was healing. And I was finally able to sleep on my side. And one night as I was sleeping, and it was strange because I was sleeping, but I became very consciously aware that I was sleeping peacefully. And I thought, wow, I mean, I had slept over those months, but not like this. And as I slept, and as I was aware of, wow, I'm really sleeping peacefully, that light came again. I felt that light come, like at the scene of the accident, that light that surrounded me, that comforting, tangible light. And I felt again as if I was rising above the hospital bed. But this time the light, it dispersed, it went away. And I was in the most beautiful place. And we use words like heaven or the spirit world or the other side. There's all these words. The only word that comes close to what I was experiencing is I was home. I was home and I was whole. I had both legs and both feet, and I began to run, and the body that I was so reverencing was complete and whole and healthy, and yet it felt so physical. Now, it was strange because, yes, perhaps my spirit had left my body, but I was having such a sensational physical experience. I could feel the energy of the ground beneath my feet. I could feel the intelligence in my feet and my calves and my thighs, and I began to run and enjoy the wholeness of being whole. And I was giddy. I was just gleefully running about thinking, I'm home and I'm whole and the pain is gone. And then I got the message I wasn't there to stay. And at that same time, there was like this corridor off to my left, and I knew intuitively I'm to go that way. And as I made my way down the corridor, I saw at the end of the corridor was a crib. Now, Griffin, my youngest son who passed, was only 14 months old at the time of the accident, and he was still sleeping in a crib. I mean, he was climbing out of it and causing problems, but he was still in a crib, and I was intrigued by this crib, and I had had so much grief around Griffin. I mean, my little boy, he'd been our miracle boy. After Spencer, we were told we may not have any more children. It took 6 years to get him here, and medical, all kinds of things. He was the miracle boy, and we lost him in this accident, and yet here was this crib. So I raced to the crib, and as I got to the crib, I looked in, and there he was, perfect, sleeping. And in the accident, his car seat had been broken up, and he had actually been ejected from the car, and it had just haunted me. I mean, it had haunted me, and yet here he was, and he was perfect, and he was sleeping, and I noticed every detail of him. And as his father, I swept him up in my arms, and I held him, and that felt physical too. I mean, I'm holding my little boy and I can feel. Have you ever picked up a sleeping child? I mean, there's a heat and a weight, and I'm holding him against me, and I can feel him solid, and I can feel him breathing. I can feel his breath on my neck, and I actually leaned over and I smelled his hair. Um, it was such a sensual experience. I smelled his hair. I thought, it's him. It's my little boy, and I'm holding him, and I'm weeping, thinking, he's okay. He's okay. And as I was holding him and crying, I felt this intense, overwhelming, cosmic, wise presence behind me. And it was coming closer and closer. And I'm holding my son and I'm crying, and this presence is coming closer. And I actually had the thought, I thought, that's God. And I thought, I'm in so much trouble. My little boy's life was cut short because I dozed off or overcorrected. He is here because I crashed the car, and this presence is coming closer, and I'm holding him, I'm weeping, and I'm thinking, I failed. I failed as a father. I failed the test of life. And I had this thought as the presence came right behind me, and my thought was, I hope I can be forgiven. And with that thought, and this almost felt physical, these divine arms wrapped around and just held me and my little boy. And that's when the lid came off. That's when there was just this download of love, of peace, of truth. And I'm thinking, I hope I can be forgiven. And there was communication, and it wasn't necessarily with words, but it flowed into me. There's nothing to forgive. It's all in divine order. And I'm thinking, how can that be? He's here. Half the family's gone. And then I began to see my life. I was looking at my life, and I'm here in the arms of God, and I'm looking, I'm saying, well, that was a mistake. I didn't mean to do that. And in these beloved arms, the communication was, but what did you learn? There was no judgment. There was no comparison. It was simply, what did you learn? And I'm like, well, I guess I learned that, and I learned that. And I'm like, well, that was wrong. And I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway. And what was communicated to me is, that's your judgment of it, not ours. We love you. And the love was so overwhelming and intense, and it was magnified because here I am holding my little boy. And I'm thinking, to me, he's perfect. He is beloved. He is divine. And as I'm sensing all that, I'm feeling that from the being that held me, that, yep, yes, yes. How you feel is how I feel. How you feel is it was very personal, but I knew the love I was feeling, the unconditional love, rippled out to every living soul. And it felt as if the entire universe was watching this. Like, it felt like concourses of ancestors and angels was watching this crazy little thing of my life. And I also, there was so much. I mean, I'm thinking, well, gosh, have I failed the test of life, And it was communicated to me, oh, my dear boy, life is not a test, it's a gift. It's an absolute gift, and you're simply there to learn. And yes, there's all these things you're learning, and I did have the why questions, but why? And I even had a cosmic download of that. It's like, because I had created it. And I was so loved that I was allowed to have the experience. And Tamron Griffin loved me enough to go. And Spencer loved me enough that he said, I'll stick around and walk with you, even if you limp. And it was like this new view of life and all this love. And I learned about choice. There was a huge thing about choice. Here I am in the arms of God, and God says to me, I want you to exercise your will. And I'm like, well, hold on a minute. It's your will be done. I've learned that since I was a little boy. And what was communicated to me is, God said, my will is your will. That's how loved you are. My will is that you have free will, that you get to choose. And I was told, you can be mad at God the rest of your life because this was allowed to happen, and half the family died, and you're crippled, and and that's a choice, and that's okay. We love you anyway. And you can beat yourself up for the rest of your life because you were driving the car. And that's okay. We love you anyway. But then there was this thing about will, about choice, but you can exercise your will. And it was like, how? And I was told, you can give your son. You can give him back. You can trust and you can hand him over. And you can choose and you can exercise your will. And therefore, it might not feel like he was ripped away from you. In fact, you can give your wife too. You can give those that have passed. You can hand them over and trust and exercise your will and exercise your choice. And in all that love and in all that peace and in all that beauty and all that trust, I kissed my little boy and I handed him back. And then, then I'm back to the hospital bed, back to the amputation and the colostomy bag and the right leg in a brace and the right arm in a sling and all of it. But there was a little different perspective. And it's not that I had this crash and had these experiences and I was fine. I wasn't. I had the crash. I had profound spiritual experiences. And I grieved like anyone else would. But I had these insights. I had these, and probably because my soul is weak, had I not had these experiences, I don't know where I'd be. I don't know what I would have, I don't know how I would have navigated this. But I was held by God. I was held by the universe. I was held in my grief. I was held in my pain, and I was allowed to make a choice and exercise my will. And it was profound. It was very profound.
I'm a mess over here, by the way.
We all are.
I love that.
Guys, it's been 28 years. I still don't know.
Well, heaven, that's how real heaven is when we talk about it, when we feel it. Those who've been there, we all know it in each other. We see it in each other when we talk about it. We can know the ones who have been there. And I love that you were able to hold your boy as God was holding his boy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what it was, Penny. I mean, and that's true of all of us. Or his girl. I mean, it's just there was so much love and there was no judgment, and it shifted things for me because I had believed, well, life's a test. God's going to judge me. I'm obviously failing, but I didn't experience that. I experienced so much love, and
Spencer needed his dad too. That's why.
Oh, he did.
The world needed Jeff Olsen.
Well, and I needed Spencer too. I mean, I'll share this, and I've shared it before, but it was so interesting because I did heal. I was able to come home. I didn't get to go to my home at first. I still had to go to my brother's house and have, physical therapy and home health. And they had built a ramp for me to operate the wheelchair. I had a little electric wheelchair that I could drive with my one, working arm. My right arm was in a sling. My right leg was in a brace sticking straight out. My left leg was amputated. I had a colostomy bag because of the ruptured intestines. And the whole rehab thing was trying to get me self-sufficient with one working arm, That's the state I came home in. And, my brothers would literally have to pick me up and put me in the wheelchair. And it came time to go home, and I was going to go to my younger brother's house, and he had taken my son in, Spencer, and just raised him like one of his own for those long months in the hospital. But I was so worried about Spence. I'm like, how's he going to deal with this? He'd seen me in the hospital, but now I'm coming home. I could lay in the bed under the covers and hug him, and we could talk and cry, but now it was going to be a different scenario. We were on his turf, and I worried about this, and we're driving home, and my brothers had loaded me in the car, and they'd gotten the wheelchair loaded on, and we arrived at the house, and they pulled up in the driveway, and I see Spencer looking out the window watching, as my brothers, his uncles, literally pick me up and put me in the wheelchair. And I'm thinking, how's he going to deal with this? How's he going to accept this? And I got in the wheelchair and I began to make my way toward the ramp. My brothers were emphatic that I do it. They wanted me to be independent. And Spencer came running out of the house and he ran toward me, and then he ran right past me. And I thought, it's just too much. I mean, the amputation, this stump of a leg. I mean, I thought, this is just too much for him. And I began to make my way toward the ramp, and I turned and I just looked to see where he went, like, where'd he go? And as I turned, I realized he had run across the street, and he started knocking on all the neighbors' doors, and he was shouting, come out, come out. My dad has made it home. Come see my dad. And, I realized that my judgments weren't his. And he made the rounds, and he came running up to me, and he did throw himself on my lap, which just about killed me. I still had all the sutures on the abdominal repair. And we've laughed about this. He's a grown man now, and he's married, and they just had a grandchild. I'm officially a grandfather. And I share this for a specific reason. I said to him, I said, look, I'm going to work really hard to get well. He was a Star Wars nut. And I said, they're going to get me a Darth Vader leg, and I'm going to learn how to walk, but it's going to take a while. I said, it's going to be like this. Are you going to be okay? And he said, Dad, if you were nothing but a puddle of blood, I would still love you. And we've laughed about that. But the reason I share this is, here I was in a wheelchair holding my surviving son in this realm. And it was no less divine than being in the other realm, in the arms of God, holding my son who had passed. I mean, suddenly heaven was right here. There was nowhere to go. There was nothing to become. There was nothing to do but be perfect in that moment, and feel the unconditional love of a child, which was every bit as amazing as the unconditional love of God. And Spencer needed me, but I think I needed him. And I think he's an older soul than I am. I think he kind of agreed. He's like, look, Dad, I'll come walk with you through this school. And he still seems to be the sage, and he still reminds me of things that are divine, even though he didn't have an experience. He didn't have an out of body or near death. He was a little boy. He was 7. And he lost his mom, and he lost his brother, and he lost his dad. In many ways, I was never going to be the same. And I've watched how he navigated that without the spiritual experiences that I had. And we did, when he was a young adult, I don't know, 19, 20 years old. I mean, he came to me, he said, Dad, I don't get it. You talk about these profound visits. You got to hug Mom, and you got to hold Griffin. And he said, I got nothing. He said, I prayed, I beat my knuckles bloody on that thing you call God, and I got nothing. And he's like, I was a little boy. I begged every day. I just want to feel my mom. And, he said, so maybe you're deceived in some crazy way, or maybe you're making it up. Or if there is a higher power, I don't think it cares about me. Because he said, I was 7. And I'd beg. I'd lay in my bed and beg. I just want to. And I didn't know what to do. I went home and I prayed. I said, "Oh God, give him something. I mean, give him. I'll give it all away. I'll give him something." And it was interesting. And I don't profess to get answers all the time, but I got a profound answer that night. And it came to me as, why are you judging your son? And I'm like, I'm not judging him. It's like, yes, you are. You're thinking that your experience is better than his. You're thinking that you'd give yours away so he might have more. Don't you know I've got him? Don't you know he's having the perfect experience for the expansion of his soul? And you had the perfect experience for the expansion of your soul, and they don't have to look alike. And I was reminded again of the unconditional love. It's like, look, your job, Dad, is to love your boy and not judge his experience. And it was an interesting time. I mean, he was in a rock band, and, he was going to school, and I thought, gosh, he could end up in a mess. And God whispered and said, that's perfect for his soul's expansion. But he didn't end up in a mess. I mean, he navigated through this, and he's become the most compassionate man I know. He's kind, he's good, he's strong, he's noble. And in fact, at one point he came to me. This was, a few years after this experience, but he's like, Dad, he said, what if I'm God's hands? What if I'm God's light? This thing, I mean, I've been looking outside myself. What if I get to show up for kids that are struggling? And he did. He got involved in Big Brothers, Big Sisters. He was doing an after-school rock and roll program. And, these 12-year-olds are banging out Metallica and expressing themselves. And he said, look, that's their therapy. And he would hold this space for healing. And we had completely different experiences, but we both come to the conclusion that love is the most powerful thing in the universe, and that love will win, and that if we can somehow be love, then we radiate that and receive it as well.
Thank you for joining us. Coming up next in part 2.
It's like my faith, my beliefs were transformed into absolute trust. And no matter what happens in life, and life is challenging, and it's beautiful, and it's blissful, and it's sorrowful, and it's all of it.
Did you have any after effects that, like new gifts that showed up for you?
It's funny. People ask me that. I think I have a deeper capacity to love.